Listen to part of a lecture in a history class. In today's lecture, I want to talk about Henry Hudson, whose exploration laid the ground for both the Dutch and the English claim to territories located in present-day New York and eastern Canada in the 17th century. Surprisingly, very little information is available about Henry Hudson's life prior to his voyages of discovery, despite the lasting fame he achieved with his explorations of the New World. By the time Hudson set out on his first voyage, a strong demand had developed in Europe for spices and other luxury goods from the Far East, and many European nations were eager to discover more efficient sea-based routes to East Asia to acquire these items. So, in 1607, Hudson led his first expedition on behalf of the Muscovy Company of London to find a northeastern passage across the Arctic Ocean to East Asia. Hudson traveled north of Europe, exploring the eastern coast of Greenland, and eventually sailing within 600 miles of the North Pole before ice fields forced him to turn his ship around and return home to England. Hudson made his second attempt to find a northeastern passage a year later, but met with the same result as before, when his ship was blocked by ice in the Arctic Ocean. Upon his return to England, Hudson was hired by the Dutch East India Company, which, despite Hudson's previous failures to find a northeastern passage, was certain that a northeast passage to the Far East existed. His orders were to sail the half-moon north of Russia and continue on to the Pacific Ocean until he reached East Asia. Once again, conditions in the Arctic Ocean were too severe to make the voyage. Hudson decided to disregard his orders and change direction, heading to North America to seek the Northwest Passage he had heard about from other explorers. The Northwest Passage supposedly connected the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans and offered a shorter route to the Far East through the North American continent. Sailing across the Atlantic Ocean, Hudson explored the North American coastline and traveled up the river that now bears his name. It was this voyage that allowed the Dutch to lay claim to the territory surrounding the Hudson River. The Dutch would launch their first colony in the Hudson River region in 1624. Hudson returned to England in November 1609, at which time he was told by the English authorities to stop exploring on behalf of the Dutch. His fourth and final ocean voyage began in 1610, financed by the Muscovy Company and the English East India Company for the purpose of finding the Northwest Passage. The ship Discovery sailed from Iceland to Greenland and on to Canada, entering Hudson Strait and Hudson Bay in June 1610. Anticipation ran high on the discovery that the Northwest Passage had finally been discovered, and the next several months were spent exploring the eastern coast of the bay. Excitement turned to disappointment, however, as the crew realized that there was no western outlet to the Pacific Ocean. In November 1610, the Discovery became locked in ice, and Hudson and his crew were forced to spend a harsh winter on shore. Many of the men became ill, and the entire group nearly starved to death. The ship was freed when the ice finally melted with the arrival of warmer weather in the spring of 1611. Hudson pressed for the continuation of the voyage, but the crew was fed up with Hudson's demanding personality and condescending manner and wanted to return home. The crew mutinied, placing Hudson, his teenage son, and several crewmen loyal to Hudson in a small boat and setting it adrift in the bay in June 1611. It was clear that the crew intended for the unfortunate castaways to perish because they were not given any food, supplies, or weapons. The mutineers returned to England, where they were arrested, and news of the treacherous crew's actions quickly spread. A rescue ship was dispatched to recover Hudson and the crew members, but the rescuers could not locate any trace of the men. Hudson and his men were never seen again, although it is assumed that everyone in the party succumbed to exposure, starvation, or disease. Although Hudson had failed to discover the Northwest Passage, his final explorations gave England territorial rights to the Hudson Bay region. Decades later, the English established a lucrative fur trading company in the area and named it the Hudson Bay Company in honor of the lost explorer.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer.
23. What is the main purpose of the lecture? 24. What does the professor imply about spices and other luxury goods from the Far East? (25) Why does the professor mention the Dutch East India Company? (26) What is the significance of Hudson's exploration of the North American coastline? (27) According to the professor, why did the sailors of the Discovery rebel? (28)
Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
Although Hudson had failed to discover the Northwest Passage, his final explorations gave England territorial rights to the Hudson Bay region. Decades later, the English established a lucrative fur trading company in the area and named it the Hudson Bay Company in honor of the lost explorer. Why does the professor say this? Decades later, the English established a lucrative fur trading company in the area and named it the Hudson Bay Company in honor of the lost explorer.